The gunshot echoed through the canyon as Delilah Graham crumpled to the ground, her body rolling down the embankment before coming to rest in a shallow ditch beside the lonely dirt road. Blood soaked through her once pristine blue traveling dress, the Wyoming sunset painting the horizon crimson as her consciousness faded into darkness. Xavier Prentiss hadn't planned on taking the North Trail back to his ranch that evening in 1876. The 28-year-old cowboy had spent the better part of the day in Sweetwater Springs delivering cattle to the railroad depot, and had intended to take the main road home. But his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Thunder, seemed determined to take the less traveled path, as if guided by some unseen hand. "All right, boy," Xavier murmured, patting Thunder's neck as they veered onto the northern trail. "I trust your instincts." The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and Xavier pulled his worn leather jacket tighter around his broad shoulders. His dark hair peeked out from beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes sharp as a hawk's scanned the horizon out of habit. In these parts, vigilance wasn't just wise, it was necessary for survival. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Thunder suddenly balked, his ears pricking forward. "What is it?" Xavier asked, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. The horse snorted and refused to move forward, pawing at the ground anxiously. "Easy, boy," Xavier soothed, dismounting to investigate. That's when he saw it, or rather, her, a crumpled form in the ditch below the trail. His heart hammered against his ribs as he scrambled down the embankment. It was a woman, her chestnut hair spread around her like a halo, her face pale as the moon. Blood had soaked through her dress, and for a terrible moment Xavier thought he was too late. "Madam," he called, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" No response. With careful fingers he pressed against her neck, searching for a pulse. For several agonizing seconds he felt nothing. Then, faint but present, the flutter of a heartbeat beneath his fingertips. "Thank God," he breathed. She was alive barely. The woman's face was marred with dirt and blood, but Xavier could see she was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features that spoke of genteel upbringing. What was she doing out here alone? And more importantly, who had shot her and left her for dead? Questions would have to wait. She needed medical attention immediately. With gentle but urgent movements, Xavier removed his bandana and pressed it against the wound in her side. "Hold on, madam," he murmured, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I'm going to get you help." He assessed her injuries as best he could. The bullet had entered her side, missing vital organs from what he could tell, but she had lost a lot of blood. The nearest doctor was in Sweetwater Springs, a good hour's ride. Making a quick decision, Xavier whistled for Thunder, who reluctantly made his way down the embankment. With utmost care, Xavier lifted the unconscious woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, a fact that worried him. How long had she been out here? "Up you go," he said, positioning her securely across Thunder's back before mounting behind her. He cradled her against his chest, one arm holding her steady, the other gripping the reins. "Hold on, madam. We're going to get you help." With a click of his tongue, Xavier urged Thunder into a gallop. The woman's head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow. Each jolt of the horse's gait worried him, but speed was essential now. "Stay with me," he murmured against her hair. "Just stay with me." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Xavier thundered into Sweetwater Springs, shouting for the doctor. Lights flickered on in windows as townsfolk peered out to see what the commotion was about. Dr. Martin's house stood at the end of the main street, a modest two-story structure with a small sign announcing his practice. Xavier barely had time to dismount before the front door swung open, revealing the doctor in his nightshirt, lamp in hand. "What in tarnation?" Dr. Martin began, then spotted the woman in Xavier's arms. "Bring her in, quickly." Xavier carried the unconscious woman into the doctor's examination room, laying her gently on the table. "Found her in a ditch off the North Trail," Xavier explained as Dr. Martin began cutting away the blood-soaked fabric of her dress. "Been shot. She's barely breathing, Doctor." Martin nodded grimly. "You did right bringing her here. Now step outside while I work." Xavier hesitated, strangely reluctant to leave the woman's side. "Go on," Dr. Martin urged. "I'll call you when I know more." Outside in the waiting room, Xavier paced. Mrs. Martin, the doctor's wife, brought him coffee which grew cold in his hands. Minutes stretched into hours as night deepened around the small town. Sheriff Taylor arrived, summoned by one of the townsfolk who'd witnessed Xavier's desperate ride into town. "Prentiss," the sheriff greeted, removing his hat. "Heard you found a woman." Xavier nodded, recounting the discovery. "Don't know who she is or what happened. She was unconscious when I found her." "Shot and left in a ditch," the sheriff mused, stroking his gray mustache. "Could be bandits." "There's been reports of the Blackwell gang operating in these parts." "Wasn't a robbery," Xavier countered. "She still had this." He pulled a delicate gold locket from his pocket. "Found it clutched in her hand. Seems personal." Sheriff Taylor took the locket, examining it. "No inscription." "Might not tell us much, but I'll keep it as evidence." "I'd rather it stayed with her," Xavier said firmly. "Might be all she has left." After a moment of consideration, the sheriff handed the locket back. "Fine, but I'll need to talk to her when she wakes up, if she wakes up." The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the woman's precarious condition. Finally, near midnight, Dr. Martin emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. His expression was grave but not defeated. "She's alive," he announced, and Xavier felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Bullet went clean through her side. Missed anything vital, but she's lost a lot of blood. Next few days will tell." "Will she make it?" Xavier asked. Dr. Martin sighed. "Can't say for certain. She's young and seems strong, but she's been through an ordeal. Exposure, blood loss. It's a wonder she's alive at all." "Can I see her?" The question surprised Xavier as much as it seemed to surprise the doctor. Dr. Martin raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Briefly. She's unconscious, but, well, sometimes company helps. Mrs. Martin's with her now." Xavier followed the doctor back to a small recovery room where the woman lay on a narrow bed. Mrs. Martin had cleaned her up and dressed her in a nightgown. With the dirt and blood washed away, her features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and full lips now pale from her ordeal. "Do we know who she is?" Mrs. Martin asked, adjusting the blanket over the woman's still form. Xavier shook his head. "No identification that I could find." "Well, she's not from around here," Mrs. Martin declared. "I know every face in Sweetwater Springs, and hers isn't one of them. By her clothes, I'd say she's from back east. Quality fabric, good stitching." Xavier approached the bed, placing the locket on the small table beside it. "I found this with her." Mrs. Martin picked it up, clicking it open. Inside was a tiny portrait of a stern-looking man and woman. "Parents, perhaps," Xavier nodded. "It was as good a guess as any." "I'll check with the stagecoach company tomorrow, see if they're missing a passenger." "You've done plenty already, Mr. Prentiss," Dr. Martin said. "The law can take it from here." But Xavier knew he wouldn't be able to simply walk away. Something about this woman, her vulnerability, the mystery surrounding her, or perhaps the simple fact that fate had placed her in his path, compelled him to see this through. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said firmly. "If that's all right." Dr. Martin nodded, a knowing look in his eye. "She'll need someone looking out for her when she wakes." If she wakes, the unspoken thought echoed in the small room. Xavier left the doctor's house with a heavy heart. The image of the woman's pale face haunted him as he made his way to the town's small hotel. His ranch was too far to return to tonight, and something told him he needed to stay close. Morning brought no change in the woman's condition. Xavier visited before heading to the stagecoach office, where he learned no passengers had been reported missing. The telegraph operator had no reports of a missing woman matching her description either. It was as if she had appeared out of thin air. For 3 days, Xavier divided his time between his ranch and Sweetwater Springs, visiting the mysterious woman each morning and evening. On the 4th day, as he sat beside her bed reading from a dog-eared copy of Ivanhoe he'd borrowed from Mrs. Martin, who insisted that hearing a human voice might help her eyelids fluttered, Xavier froze mid-sentence, watching intently. Then slowly, her eyes opened a startling shade of green that reminded him of the high mountain meadows in spring. "Water," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Xavier hastily poured water from the pitcher on the nightstand, supporting her head as she took small sips. "Thank you," she managed, her voice stronger now. Her gaze focused on him, confusion evident. Who are you?" "Xavier Prentiss, madam. I found you 4 days ago and brought you to town." Her brow furrowed. "Found me?" "You were shot and left in a ditch off the North Trail," Xavier explained gently. "Do you remember what happened?" Fear flickered across her face and she tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Easy now," Xavier cautioned, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here." "Where is here?" she asked, settling back against the pillows. "Sweetwater Springs, Wyoming territory." This information seemed to surprise her. "Wyoming? I was heading to Malad City, Idaho." "Malad City," Xavier repeated. "That's a fair distance west of here." "What business did you have there?" She hesitated, then said, "My aunt lives there. I was going to stay with her." "And your name, madam?" "Delilah," she replied. "Delilah Graham, Miss Graham," Xavier acknowledged. "The doctor will want to know you're awake. And the sheriff has questions about who did this to you." Fear returned to her eyes. I can't. "It's all right," Xavier assured her. "You don't have to talk about it now. Rest. I'll get Dr. Martin." As he stood to leave, her hand caught his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't go," she pleaded. "Please." Something in her voice, the raw vulnerability, made it impossible to refuse. Xavier sat back down, taking her hand in his. "I'll stay as long as you need." Relief softened her features as she drifted back to sleep, her hand still clasped in his. Over the next few days, Delilah's strength gradually returned. The story she told Sheriff Taylor was sparse on details. She had been traveling by stagecoach to visit her aunt in Malad City when the coach was attacked by bandits. The driver and guard had been killed, and she had been shot when she refused to hand over the locket containing her parents' portraits. "They must have thought I died when I fell from the coach," she explained. "I remember tumbling down an embankment, then nothing until I woke up here." The sheriff was skeptical. "Strange that we had no reports of a stagecoach robbery. Which line were you traveling with?" Delilah hesitated. I don't recall. Everything from before is foggy." Xavier, who had taken to visiting daily, often staying for hours, noticed the hesitation but didn't press. Something about Delilah's story didn't quite add up, but he couldn't bring himself to doubt her. Not when she looked at him with those trusting green eyes. As Delilah recovered, the town of Sweetwater Springs embraced her. Mrs. Martin provided clothes, the hotel owner's wife brought home cooked meals, and even gruff old Sheriff Taylor softened around her. But it was Xavier who remained her constant companion, reading to her, telling her about his ranch, making her laugh with stories of his misadventures as a young cowboy. A week after she regained consciousness, Dr. Martin declared Delilah well enough to leave his care, though she would need continued rest to fully recover. "Where will you go?" Xavier asked as he helped her pack the few belongings the townspeople had provided. Delilah's smile faltered. "I should continue to Malad City, I suppose. My aunt is expecting me." "You're still weak," Xavier pointed out. "The journey would be hard on you." "I have little choice," she replied. "I can't impose on the Martins' kindness any longer." Xavier made a decision then, one that had been forming in his mind for days. "Stay at my ranch. I have plenty of room, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, would welcome the company. When you're stronger, I'll take you to Malad City myself." Delilah looked up at him, surprised. "I couldn't possibly, please," Xavier said. "It would ease my mind to know you're safe and recovering properly." After a moment's hesitation, Delilah nodded. "Thank you, Xavier. Your kindness has been unexpected." The Prentiss Ranch lay 15 miles outside Sweetwater Springs, a sprawling property nestled against the foothills of the Wind River Mountains. The main house was larger than Delilah had expected, a 2-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. "It was my parents' dream," Xavier explained as he helped Delilah down from the wagon. "They came west from Pennsylvania in '52. Started with nothing but determination and built all this." "They must be remarkable people," Delilah said. A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "They were. Lost them both to influenza 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly, her hand finding his. "I know the pain of losing parents." Their eyes met, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Mrs. Fletcher, a plump, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, welcomed Delilah warmly. "About time this house had a woman's touch again," she declared, showing Delilah to a comfortable bedroom overlooking the mountains. The days at the ranch fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings, Delilah would sit on the porch, watching Xavier work with the horses or direct his ranch hands. Afternoons, she would help Mrs. Fletcher with household tasks as her strength allowed, learning to bake bread and make preserves. Evenings were spent by the fireplace, where Xavier would read aloud, or they would simply talk, sharing pieces of themselves bit by bit. Delilah spoke of growing up in Boston, her father a successful merchant, her mother a society hostess. She talked about her love of literature and music, her dream of one day seeing the great cities of Europe. Xavier shared stories of growing up on the frontier, learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk, the lessons his father had taught him about respecting the land and the animals that sustained them. What Delilah didn't share was the real reason she had fled Boston, or why she had been traveling alone. Each time the conversation veered toward her journey west, she skillfully redirected it. If Xavier noticed, he didn't press. 2 weeks into her stay, Delilah's strength had improved enough that she could take short walks around the ranch. Xavier showed her his favorite spots: the crystal-clear stream where trout jumped on summer evenings, the stand of aspen trees that turned golden in autumn, the high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. It was in this meadow, surrounded by a riot of color, that Delilah finally opened the locket she had clutched so desperately, even while unconscious. "My parents," she said, showing Xavier the tiny portraits. "This was taken the year before they died. Carriage accident 3 years ago." "You miss them," Xavier observed, not a question but a statement of understanding. Delilah nodded. "Every day. They weren't perfect. My father was stern, my mother preoccupied with social standing, but they loved me in their way." "Is that why you left Boston? Too many memories?" Delilah closed the locket, her expression guarded. "Partly." Xavier didn't push. Instead, he picked a wildflower, a delicate blue columbine, and tucked it behind her ear. "Blue suits you," he said softly. Delilah's cheeks flushed, and for a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. The moment was broken by the distant sound of a rider approaching. Xavier's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to intercept the visitor. Delilah watched as Xavier greeted the rider, a young ranch hand who had ridden out from town with a message. Their conversation was brief, but when Xavier returned to her side, his expression was troubled. "What is it?" she asked. "Sheriff Taylor wants to see you in town. Says he has information about the stagecoach robbery." Fear flickered in Delilah's eyes. "I see. We don't have to go today," Xavier offered. "I can tell him you're still recovering." But Delilah straightened her shoulders, determination replacing fear. "No, it's time I faced this. We'll go tomorrow." That evening, Xavier found Delilah on the porch, staring at the sunset. He sat beside her on the swing, their shoulders nearly touching. "You don't have to tell me," he said quietly, "but I get the feeling there's more to your story than a stagecoach robbery." Delilah remained silent for so long that Xavier thought she wouldn't answer. Then, just as the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, she spoke. "After my parents died, I was left in the care of my father's business partner, Nathaniel Hargrove. He had always been kind to me, and I had no reason to distrust him." Her voice hardened. "That was my first mistake." "What happened?" Xavier asked gently. "Nathaniel had mismanaged my father's business, taken out loans he couldn't repay. When I came of age and inherited my father's estate, he saw a solution to his problems." Delilah's hands twisted in her lap. "He arranged a marriage for me to his largest creditor's son, a cruel, brutal man twice my age." Xavier's jaw tightened. "You refused." "I tried. Nathaniel made it clear I had no choice. The night before the wedding, I overheard him talking with my fiancée." The word dripped with disgust. "They planned to have me declared unstable after the marriage, to take control of my inheritance completely. I realized then that I had to run." "So you fled west," Xavier concluded. Delilah nodded. "I took what money and jewelry I could gather and slipped away in the night. I chose Malad City because my mother had a sister there, one the family rarely mentioned because she had married beneath her station. I thought I would be safe with her." "But Hargrove tracked you down," Xavier guessed. "He must have," Delilah agreed. "I was careful, traveled under a different name, but 3 days into my journey, a man boarded the stagecoach in Cheyenne. He watched me constantly. Then, outside Sweetwater Springs, he pulled a gun. He said Nathaniel wanted his property back." Anger surged through Xavier. "You're not property." "To men like Nathaniel, women and cattle are categorized similarly," Delilah said bitterly. "I refused to go back. We struggled for the gun. It went off, and I was thrown from the coach when the horses bolted. I thought I would die there in that ditch." Xavier took her hand, his touch gentle despite the rage he felt on her behalf. "You're safe now. I won't let them hurt you." Delilah looked at him, vulnerability and hope warring in her eyes. "You believe me?" "Every word," Xavier assured her. "And tomorrow we'll tell Sheriff Taylor exactly what happened. Attempted murder isn't taken lightly, even in the Wyoming territory." Delilah's hand tightened around his. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything." The next morning they rode into Sweetwater Springs, Xavier watching the trail vigilantly. Sheriff Taylor greeted them at his office, his expression grave. "Miss Graham," he said, removing his hat, "glad to see you recovering." "Thank you, Sheriff," Delilah replied. "I understand you have news about the attack." Sheriff Taylor nodded. "Got a telegram from the authorities in Cheyenne. They found a stagecoach abandoned about 30 miles east of here. Driver and guard both shot. They were carrying mail and passengers from the eastern route." "That would be my coach," Delilah confirmed, and proceeded to tell the sheriff everything she had told Xavier the night before. Sheriff Taylor listened without interruption, making notes. When she finished, he sighed heavily. "Miss Graham, I believe your account. Problem is, without witnesses, it's your word against this Hargrove fellows, and wealthy men from back east have a way of making the law work in their favor." "So you're saying there's nothing to be done?" Xavier asked, frustration evident. "I didn't say that," Sheriff Taylor countered. "I'm saying we need to be smart about this. Miss Graham, did anyone besides this man who shot you know you were headed to Malad City?" Delilah thought for a moment. "I don't believe so. I was careful not to leave a trail." "Then that's where you should go, as planned," the sheriff advised. "I'll send telegrams to the authorities in Boston, inquire about this Hargrove character and the alleged fiancé. Meanwhile, you'll be safely out of reach in Idaho." Xavier nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I promised to take Delilah to Malad City when she was stronger." "The sooner the better," Sheriff Taylor said. "If Hargrove's man doesn't report back, he might send others." The gravity of the situation settled over them. Delilah's hand found Xavier's, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We'll leave tomorrow," Xavier decided. "Take the northern route through the mountains, less chance of being followed." Sheriff Taylor nodded approvingly. "I'll arrange for a deputy to ride with you to the territorial border. After that, you're on your own." As they left the sheriff's office, Delilah's steps faltered. Xavier steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. Delilah looked up at him, her expression conflicted. I didn't expect to feel this way about leaving Sweetwater Springs." Xavier asked, though he suspected she meant something else entirely. "Leaving your ranch," she clarified softly. "Leaving you." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Xavier's heart raced, but before he could respond, a commotion down the street caught their attention. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. He reined in hard in front of the sheriff's office, dismounting before the animal had fully stopped. "Sheriff Taylor," the man called, his voice urgent. "Telegram from Cheyenne." Man matching the description of Miss Graham's attacker was spotted heading this way with two others. Xavier's arm went instinctively around Delilah's waist, pulling her close as if to shield her. "How far?" he demanded. "Half a day's ride, maybe less," the rider replied. They were asking questions about a woman and a cowboy who rescued her. Sheriff Taylor emerged from his office, his expression grim. "Change of plans. You need to leave now, not tomorrow. Head for the high country. I'll have my deputy meet you at Thompson's Crossing with supplies." Xavier nodded. "My horse is at the livery. We can be ready to ride in 20 minutes. "Make it 10, the sheriff advised. "I'll gather some men, try to slow these fellows down if they show up." The next half hour was a blur of activity. Xavier procured a sturdy mare for Delilah from the livery stable, along with basic supplies. Mrs. Martin hastily packed food while Xavier purchased ammunition from the general store. As they prepared to depart, Sheriff Taylor pressed a folded paper into Delilah's hand. "Letter of introduction to the sheriff in Malad City, explaining the situation. He's a good man. He'll help you get settled with your aunt." "Thank you," Delilah said, tucking the paper into her saddlebag. The sheriff turned to Xavier. "Take care of her, Prentiss." "With my life," Xavier promised, the words coming easily because they were true. They rode out of Sweetwater Springs at a steady pace, heading northwest toward the mountains. Xavier set a challenging route, avoiding the main trails in favor of game paths and cattle tracks known only to local ranchers. They rode in silence, alert to every sound, every movement in the landscape around them. By mid-afternoon, they had climbed into the foothills, the air growing cooler as they gained elevation. Xavier glanced frequently at Delilah, concerned about her endurance after her recent injury. but she rode with determination, never complaining despite the obvious discomfort. "We'll rest soon," he promised as they forded a shallow stream. "There's a hunter's cabin not far ahead where we can spend the night." Delilah nodded, her face pale but resolute. "I'm fine. Don't slow down on my account." The cabin, when they reached it as dusk was falling, was rudimentary but sound: a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed. Xavier quickly built a fire while Delilah unsaddled the horses, refusing his offer to do it for her. "I'm not helpless," she insisted. "And you've been taking care of me long enough." As night settled over the mountains, they shared a simple meal of jerky, hard cheese, and biscuits Mrs. Martin had packed. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and despite the circumstances of their flight, a strange sense of peace settled over them. "I'm sorry you've been drawn into my troubles," Delilah said, breaking the comfortable silence. Xavier looked at her across the fire, the flames reflecting in her green eyes. "I'm not." "No?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. "No," he confirmed. "If finding you in that ditch led to this moment, I wouldn't change a thing." The honesty in his voice made Delilah's breath catch. She moved closer to him until their shoulders touched as they sat before the fire. "When I was lying in that ditch," she said softly, "I thought I was going to die alone, far from home. I prayed for help, but I didn't really expect it to come." Her eyes met his. "Then you found me. You not only saved my life, Xavier, you gave me hope when I had none." Xavier took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Delilah!" The sound of approaching horses interrupted him. Instantly, Xavier was on his feet, extinguishing the lamp and moving to the window. "3 riders," he reported in a hushed voice. "Coming up the trail." Delilah stood, fear evident in her rigid posture. "Hargrove's men, most likely." Xavier checked his revolver. "Stay here away from the windows. If anything happens to me, take my horse and keep heading northwest. Thompson's Crossing is about 10 miles from here. The deputy will be waiting." "I'm not leaving you," Delilah said firmly, picking up the rifle Xavier had brought from his ranch. Xavier looked at her with surprise and growing admiration. "You know how to use that?" "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves," she replied, checking the weapon with practiced ease. One of the few progressive notions he held. A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "Remind me not to underestimate you, Miss Graham." They positioned themselves on either side of the cabin's single door, listening as the riders approached. The horses stopped about 50 yards away, and hushed voices carried on the night air. "That's the cabin Jeffries mentioned," a male voice said. "Light was on a minute ago." "Could be anyone," another voice cautioned. "Hunters, trappers, or our quarry," the first voice insisted. "Fan out. Check the horses." Xavier and Delilah exchanged glances. Their horses were tethered at the back of the cabin, partially concealed by a stand of pines, but they would be discovered quickly by anyone searching. "We need to slow them down, by time," Xavier whispered. Delilah nodded, understanding his intent. "Be careful." Xavier slipped out the back door, moving silently into the darkness while Delilah maintained her position by the front door, rifle ready. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Then a shout broke the night, followed by the crack of a gunshot. More shots followed, and the sounds of a scuffle. Delilah's heart pounded, but she held her position, trusting Xavier. Suddenly, the front door burst open. A man stood silhouetted against the night, revolver in hand. Without hesitation, Delilah fired, the bullet striking the doorframe inches from the intruder's head. "Next one won't miss," she warned, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Drop your weapon." "Miss Graham," the man said, lowering his gun slightly. "Mr. Hargrove is most distressed by your absence. He's offering a substantial reward for your safe return." "I'm not going back," Delilah stated firmly. "Now drop your weapon." The man's eyes narrowed. "You shot Muldoon. That complicates matters." "He tried to kill me," Delilah countered. "Self-defense is recognized even in Boston." "Interesting interpretation," the man said with a cold smile. "But I'm not paid to debate. I'm paid to bring you back." Before Delilah could respond, a shadow appeared behind the man. The butt of a revolver came down hard on his head and he crumpled to the floor, revealing Xavier standing behind him. "The other two?" Delilah asked, lowering her rifle. "Tied up with their own belts," Xavier replied, quickly binding the unconscious man. "They'll be uncomfortable but alive when the sheriff's men find them." Relief washed over Delilah, followed by concern as she noticed blood on Xavier's shirt. "You're hurt," Xavier glanced down. "Just a graze." "One of them got lucky." Despite his reassurance, Delilah insisted on examining the wound. A bullet had indeed grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow. She cleaned and bandaged it with supplies from Xavier's saddlebags, her touch gentle but sure. "We should move," Xavier said when she had finished. "They might have friends following." Delilah nodded. "Where will we go?" Xavier considered their options. "There's an old mining camp higher up the mountain. Abandoned years ago, but the cabins are still standing. We can hole up there until morning, then push on to Thompson's Crossing." They rode through the night, the mountain air growing increasingly cold as they climbed. Delilah's side ached from the long hours in the saddle, her wound protesting the exertion, but she kept pace with Xavier without complaint. The mining camp appeared as the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, a cluster of weathered cabins clinging to a shelf of land carved into the mountainside. Xavier chose the sturdiest-looking structure, quickly assessing it for hazards before helping Delilah dismount. "Rest," he urged, helping her to a rough bunk while he tended the horses. "I'll keep watch." But exhaustion claimed them both. Delilah woke hours later to find Xavier asleep in a chair near the door, his revolver in his lap. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single grimy window, indicating it was well past noon. Moving quietly so as not to wake him, Delilah explored the cabin. Miners had left in a hurry. It seemed rusted tools, cracked dishes, and tattered clothing remained. In a cupboard, she found a tin of coffee, miraculously still sealed. Using water from their canteens and a pot left behind, she managed to brew a pot over a small fire in the cabin's crude stove. The smell of coffee roused Xavier. He blinked, momentarily disoriented, then relaxed when he saw Delilah pouring the steaming liquid into 2 chipped mugs. "You should have woken me," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "You needed the rest," Delilah replied, sitting beside him. "Besides, it gave me a chance to feel useful for once." They sipped their coffee in companionable silence, the events of the night before giving way to a strange calm. Outside, birds called to one another, and a gentle breeze stirred the pines surrounding the abandoned camp. "We'll reach Thompson's Crossing by nightfall," Xavier said, planning their next move. "From there, it's another 2 days' ride to Mallet City." Delilah nodded, but her expression was thoughtful, almost sad. "Yes, I suppose we will." Xavier studied her face. "You don't seem eager to reach your destination." "It's not that," Delilah said, setting down her mug. "It's just, I barely know my aunt. What if she doesn't welcome me? What if Hargrove's men find me there too?" "Then we'll figure something else out," Xavier promised. "I won't leave you until I know you're safe." Delilah looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in the strong lines of his face, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet determination in his bearing. This man had risked his life for her more than once, with no expectation of reward. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. Xavier set down his coffee and took her hands in his. "Because from the moment I found you in that ditch, something changed in me. I can't explain it, but I know that ensuring your safety, your happiness, matters more to me than anything else." "Xavier," Delilah began, but he shook his head, needing to continue. "I know we've known each other only a short time. I know you have plans that might not include a Wyoming rancher. But I also know that when I thought those men might harm you last night, I would have moved heaven and earth to prevent it." Delilah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I've been running for so long, afraid to trust anyone. Then you found me, and for the first time since my parents died, I felt safe, valued." Xavier's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Is that all you feel?" "No," Delilah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel so much more." The space between them vanished as Xavier leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and certain. Delilah's hands moved to his shoulders, drawing him closer, the fear and exhaustion of their flight momentarily forgotten in the discovery of this new, precious connection. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens in Malad City, know that you have a home with me if you want it." "I want it," Delilah said without hesitation. "I want a life where I make my own choices, where I'm not valued for my inheritance but for who I am. I want to wake up to mountains and open skies," and her voice caught. "And you, Xavier, I want a life with you." Joy like he had never known surged through Xavier. "Then that's what we'll build together." They reached Thompson's Crossing that evening to find not only Sheriff Taylor's deputy waiting but the sheriff himself, along with 4 armed men. "Caught your pursuers," the sheriff informed them with satisfaction. "Found them right where you left them, Prentiss. They're in my jail now, facing charges of attempted murder and kidnapping." Relief washed over Delilah. "Will the charges stand? Nathaniel Hargrove has powerful connections. I telegraphed a judge in Cheyenne who happens to owe me a favor," Sheriff Taylor said with a wink. "And it seems Mr. Hargrove has other problems. Got a reply from the Boston police. They're investigating him for embezzlement and fraud. Your disappearance brought unwanted attention to his business practices." "So I'm free?" Delilah asked, scarcely able to believe it. "Free as a bird," the sheriff confirmed, "though I still recommend you continue to your aunt's as planned, at least until things settle down." Xavier and Delilah exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. "We will," Xavier said, "but we have a stop to make first." That stop was a small church in the settlement of Pine Creek, where a kindly pastor listened to their extraordinary story and agreed to marry them without the customary waiting period. Sheriff Taylor and his deputy stood as witnesses while Xavier and Delilah exchanged vows, their hands joined as firmly as their futures. "I found you once when you needed me," Xavier promised as he slipped a simple gold band onto Delilah's finger, a ring purchased from the Pine Creek General Store with the last of his traveling money. "I will always find my way back to you. And I will never again be afraid while you're by my side," Delilah vowed, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. The journey to Malad City took them through mountains and valleys, each mile strengthening the bond between them. When they finally arrived, Delilah's aunt, a practical, warm-hearted woman named Eleanor, welcomed them with open arms, unsurprised by the news of their marriage. "Your mother wrote to me more often than the family knew," she explained as she served them tea in her modest but comfortable home. "She mentioned your situation with Hargrove. I've been expecting you, though not with a husband." Her twinkling eyes took in Xavier with approval. "A pleasant surprise, I must say." They stayed in Malad City for a month, allowing Delilah to know her aunt and giving Xavier time to send for additional funds from his ranch accounts. Eleanor, it turned out, was not only welcoming but insightful, helping Delilah come to terms with her parents' deaths and her subsequent trials. "You're stronger than you know," Elinor told her niece as they walked in her garden one autumn afternoon. "You've faced loss, betrayal, and violence, yet here you stand not broken but renewed." Delilah glanced across the garden to where Xavier was repairing Elinor's fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his movements efficient and sure. "I had help," she said softly. Elinor followed her gaze and smiled. "The best kind of love doesn't rescue us, my dear. It simply gives us a safe place to rescue ourselves." When they finally returned to Xavier's ranch, winter was settling over Wyoming. The mountains were dusted with snow, the air crisp and invigorating. Mrs. Fletcher greeted them with tears of joy and a home prepared for the new mistress of Prentiss Ranch. "I know you'd be coming back together," she declared, hugging Delilah. "Could see it in Mr. Prentiss's eyes whenever he talked about you, even before you woke up." That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom, now their bedroom, Xavier traced the scar on Delilah's side, a permanent reminder of how close he had come to losing her before he even knew her. "I will never stop being grateful that Thunder chose the North Trail that day," he murmured against her hair. Delilah turned in his arms, her fingertips brushing his cheek. "Do you believe in fate, Xavier?" He considered the question seriously. "I believe that life offers us moments of choice." Taking the North Trail instead of the main road was a small choice that changed everything. Finding you, helping you, those were choices too. "Falling in love?" Delilah asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Xavier smiled, pulling her closer. "That wasn't a choice at all. That was as inevitable as the sunrise." Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, wildflowers in the meadows, and the news that Delilah was expecting their first child. Xavier's joy knew no bounds as he watched his wife blossom, her quiet strength and gentle humor making her beloved by everyone on the ranch. Summer came, hot and golden, and with it a letter from Boston. Nathaniel Hargrove had been convicted of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Delilah's inheritance, much of which he had attempted to appropriate, was being held in trust for her by a reputable bank. "We don't need it," Delilah said as she and Xavier sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. "The ranch provides everything we need." "It's your legacy," Xavier pointed out. "Your parents wanted you to have it." Delilah rested her hand on her growing belly. "Perhaps we'll use it for our children's education, or to expand the ranch, or to help others who need a second chance." Xavier covered her hand with his. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you, always." In late autumn, as the aspen trees turned to gold, Delilah gave birth to a son they named James, after Xavier's father. Mrs. Fletcher declared him the spitting image of Xavier. With one notable exception, he had Delilah's striking green eyes. The years that followed brought more children: a daughter, Elinor, named for Delilah's aunt, another son, Thomas, and finally, a second daughter, Rose. The Prentiss family thrived, their ranch expanding as their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the territory. Delilah never forgot how close she had come to a vastly different life. Each year, on the anniversary of the day Xavier found her, they would ride together to the spot on the North Trail. There, they would leave flowers in the ditch where she had lain, a gesture of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together. "You ever regret it?" Xavier asked once, as they stood on that spot on their 10th anniversary. "Leaving Boston, enduring everything you did?" Delilah looked at him, at the face she had woken to for a decade, lined now with experience but still as dear to her as ever. "Not for a moment," she said truthfully. "Every step of that journey led me to you." Xavier pulled her into his arms, still marveling that this remarkable woman had chosen to build a life with him. "I found a heartbeat in a ditch and discovered my own heart in the process," he murmured against her hair. "And I found not just a rescuer," Delilah replied, "but a home." As they rode back to their ranch, to their children and the life they had built together, both knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult, lead exactly where they are meant to.